panelists can chat.
All right, we will just start in a couple of minutes. All right, let's just give it one more minute and then we will begin. Thank you for waiting. All right, let's give it another 30 seconds and then we'll begin. Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is Raja Kushalnagar, and welcome to our first ASL AI session. So to give you a bit of background about myself, English is my first language. I am the director of the Information Technology program at Gallaudet. Today, I would like to introduce each of you to Heather Dowdy, who works at Microsoft. Heather has over a decade of experience developing and demonstrating accessible technology in mobile, web, and artificial intelligence. Heather is the oldest daughter of deaf parents and is fluent in American Sign Language. Heather is motivated about connecting people with disabilities of various races and different backgrounds through technology. She is the leader of the partner program at Microsoft and works with the Microsoft AI grant program. Heather has worked to support and encourage the growth of a number of startup companies, including researchers and NGOs, as well as providing individuals with funding support from Microsoft to allow them to better grow their technological impact, specifically for people with disabilities. Prior to moving to the Seattle area, Heather was the senior product manager for the Motorola Mobility Group in Chicago and worked with accessibility engineering. She also works at the Mobile Manufacturers Forum and is the chair of the board of directors of the World Institute on Disability. Heather enjoys using the design thinking process to create products and innovate to find new solutions that empower people like you and me to more efficiently use technology in our everyday lives. She is the co-founder of the Microsoft Ninja Camp, which provides STEM leadership training for high school students with disabilities. She also has a bachelor's in science, in engineering, from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She has a BS in electrical engineering. She is a native from Chicago, and she can often be found exploring the beauty of the Pacific Northwest with her husband and 3 young children. She also enjoys reading, journaling, and interacting with people of different cultures while traveling the world. Welcome, Heather.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much, Raja, and thank you, Gallaudet, for having me here. I'm going to share my screen now. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm excited to kick off the first of 4 presentations related to the Microsoft and Gallaudet AI ASL Sign Language Challenge. Today, I get to talk to you about what is AI. I'm going to cover a couple of questions today. Who am I? What is innovation? What is AI and machine learning all about? And how should AI and machine learning be used? And finally, what's next? So who am I? I stand before you. I'm an African-American woman with dark black hair, shoulder length. I'm wearing glasses, a black t-shirt that reads AI for accessibility. I know some of you are trying to guess my age, but don't worry, I look good. But normally when I talk about who I am, I start with a story. And Raja already shared a little bit about my background, but let me tell you a little bit more and why it means so much to me. Many years ago, but not that long ago, I remember getting off the bus and walking home from school. I climbed up the stairs, rang the doorbell, because I realized that I had forgotten my keys. Oh no, the typical teenager forgetting their keys. And so I rang the doorbell because I just knew that someone was home. And I peered through the window looking for my parents. And I could see my dad in the far back of the house near the kitchen. And so I'm like banging on the doorbell, hoping that he walks closer to the front past the lamp that's connected to the doorbell. And I'm banging, but he's all the way in the back and he doesn't see it. And so I sit down and I just take my time reading a book. I didn't have a mobile phone back in those days, so I couldn't call him and connect to our family's TTY. After a few hours, yes, hours, he finally came up and noticed that I was sitting on the porch. I tell that story because I'm a CODA, as Raja mentioned, child of deaf adults. Both of my parents lost their hearing when they were young, and I started signing as a baby. But what I remember the most outside of our beautiful language and community is all the tech that was in our house, just for us to communicate with others as part of our daily lives. And so surrounded by all that tech, I like to say I was born to be an ally. And so I got really fascinated with mobile phones. And I started my career journey in mobile accessibility focused on hearing aid compatibility. I worked at Motorola in Chicago, one of the pioneers of mobile phones, for 10 years. It was a lot of fun developing new features and launching products and actually seeing them in people's hands. We've changed a lot when it comes to the mobile phones. And so, yes, today we take it for granted, especially in a place like the US compared to globally, where everyone might not have a phone. But I still remember that story I told you, where I couldn't just whip out my phone back then and just connect with my parents easily. Well, a few years ago, my family and I relocated from Chicago to the Seattle area so that I could work at Microsoft. I started at Microsoft in our IT department focused on web accessibility and the redesign and launch of our new careers website. It was a lot of fun working on WCAG standards and figuring out exactly how to coach our engineers into providing an accessible experience so that whoever wanted to apply to Microsoft could. And these days, I'm on the AI for Accessibility team at Microsoft, where we have a mission to empower the more than 1 billion people in the world living with a disability by pushing the limits of what AI can do in accessibility. In the areas of employment, we're also looking at education, we're also looking at fostering independence in the home and in the community. So my career journey has traversed from mobile, web, to now to AI and accessibility. So as I said, I love mobile phones. But more than that, I love the design thinking process, and I love thinking about innovation. And more importantly, I know from personal experience that innovation can come from anywhere. Great ideas can come from anywhere. And so it's important for us to remember a little bit on what innovation has been. For many of us, particularly in the disability community, we're no stranger to what Microsoft calls a hack culture, in the sense that we can make our environments fit our needs. And so in these examples on the screen, I have the on-screen keyboard that we use seamlessly today for touch screen mobile phones. I have word prediction that we use in text and email messages, and magnification, which is also pretty standard in our phones and devices. The idea is the same though, particularly when it comes to accessibility. When we design for one use case, one person, then we can extend that to many. We can extend the benefits of that to many. But it's also important to talk about what innovation is not. I mean, I like to joke with people on this slide and say things like, you get a glove, you get a glove, you get a glove, because I don't know about you, but every couple months, somebody in my network sends me an email with an article on some team that has created sign language gloves that's going to just solve all of my family's communication needs. But you and I know that that isn't true. And that isn't innovation. And that's because we have found that innovation is more of a cycle that is very much grounded in human need. What exactly does the community need, and how are they going to use it? It's so important to have inclusive design practices that actually bring in people with disabilities into the design and development life cycle. And then that can lead to technology innovation and, of course, progress. But we shouldn't be so fascinated with the technology innovation that we come up with things like the sign language gloves, which are gawky and not the way that we communicate in the deaf community. We shouldn't focus on doing things just because we can or just because the technology is there. But again, really, really focusing and grounding ourselves on the human need. And again, nothing for us without us. So you've probably heard a lot about AI. It's such a buzzword. And I want to ask you, what do you think AI is? So go ahead and type in the chat window your thoughts on how you would define AI. Let's see what folks are saying. Automated learning is one response. HAL 9000. Computer generated intelligence. Social Dilemma. You've seen the movie. I haven't seen that yet, but hopefully I get to watch it this weekend. Okay. Great. Let me go back to sharing. And let me see the best way. Hopefully you can still see my screen here.
We can see you clearly. Yep.
Okay. Fantastic. So AI is just technology. It's computers that can perceive, learn, and reason like humans, but the goal is not to replace humans. AI should never replace humans. It is meant to be artificial or fake intelligence that can complement what humans already know and do. And there are a couple ways that machines can do this. The reason why you hear so much about AI these days is because technology is moving at a rapid pace. I mean, there was a time where there were computer voices that sounded very robotic, but we've reached almost 95% in terms of speech human parity, where it sounds more and more like a human. And then there's 96% parity with computer vision, and translation has increased and continues to increase, as well as reading human parity. All of this means is that, yes, computers are able to do a lot more these days. And you've seen that in some of these examples of AI. So one example that you've probably encountered is a chatbot when logging onto a website and needing to contact support. These chatbots normally use a Q&A maker to create a knowledge base of different questions and answers that the computer or the bot can answer independently when interacting with a human. There's also some what we call language understanding service provided so that it sounds more like a normal human conversation. Then there's pedestrian detection that's found in cars and uses computer vision for object detection, for instance, a person walking in a crosswalk. Here's another example of AI that is Microsoft's mobile phone app that we created that turns the visual world into an audible experience. It's very helpful for people who are blind or live with low vision. This particular app was created during a Microsoft hackathon, with employees just really spending a lot of time trying to figure out what exactly the community needed and what technology could do about it. So I'll play the video really quickly.
Seeing AI is a Microsoft research project for people with visual impairments. The app narrates the world around you by turning the visual world into an audible experience. Point your phone's camera, select a channel, and hear a description. The app recognizes saved friends.
Jenny near top right, 3 feet away.
Describes the people around you, including their emotions.
28-year-old female wearing glasses looking happy.
It reads text out loud as it comes into view, like on an envelope.
Ken Lawrence, P.O. Box,
or a room entrance.
Conference 2005.
Or scan and read documents like books and letters. The app will guide you and recognize the text with its formatting.
Top and left edge is not visible. Hold steady. Lease agreement. This agreement
When paying with cash, the app identifies currency bills.
$20 US.
When looking for something in your pantry or at the store, use the barcode scanner with audio cues to help you find what you want.
Campbell's tomato soup.
When available, hear additional product details.
Heated microwave bowl on height.
And even hear descriptions of images in other apps like Twitter by importing them into Seeing AI.
A close-up of Bill Gates.
Finally, explore our experimental features like scene descriptions to get a glimpse of the future.
I think it's a young girl throwing a frisbee in the park.
Experience the world around you with the Seeing AI app from Microsoft.
So the Seeing AI app has a couple of different channels from what you can see to recognize currency. It's also kind of fun for it to try to guess the person's age, describe a person visually, also recognizing handwriting. So a couple of things that the Seeing AI app uses object detection and some of our vision services in AI to do. There's also live captions and subtitles in PowerPoint, which hopefully many of you all are familiar with. What's really cool is just the number of languages, both spoken and written, that are supported and growing. But you all probably also have your experiences where captions aren't just quite right either. And so there is two schools of thoughts or two threads when it comes to AI. There are some pre-built services like what we've been talking about, where you can just plug and play into your solution things like a translation service or vision, or object detection, computer vision, speech services, text to speech, speech to text, those sorts of things. And then there are some more custom things that require lots of data. And so to improve things like captioning, lots and lots more data will be needed. And that's more of the field of machine learning, where you're focused on different algorithms that take this data, lots of data, and the data could be images, it could be text, languages, you name it. But you want to have lots and lots of data with machine learning, and then you want to organize that data in such a way that you can train a model. So no matter how complex the data is, as long as it's organized, you can use a simple algorithm to train the model, and then you want the model to make a prediction. And that prediction will be given based on previous data for something in the future. So for instance, if you take all of Seattle's housing pricing data in real estate for the past 10 years, how much houses in one particular area have sold over 10 years, use that data and train a model with it, then perhaps you can use a new property that isn't included in that data and try to make a prediction on how much that house would sell for. And so the thing to remember about machine learning is that you need lots and lots of data, and that it's making a prediction based on a confidence level. And so that's really important. We can't assume that it's just 100% confidence level. It totally depends on the data that was used and the algorithm used to train the model. Some examples of machine learning that you might be familiar with, Netflix in their personalization and recommendation engine. Shout out to DeafU. I hear my colleagues are been watching the series. I haven't watched it yet, but I need to add it to my list soon. And then there's Uber and Lyft, the ride sharing services, and the focus there is on demand prediction. And then Microsoft uses machine learning in our Outlook email spam filter. So how should AI and machine learning be used? We have a little bit more sense of what it is and some of the examples, but I want to caution us here that, again, just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should. And there are some ethical considerations when using AI technology. And so in this case, there was a company that created a video interview platform that was able to use computer vision and facial recognition, as well as speech and vision services to predict job candidate performance based on their facial expressions, tone of voice, and vocabulary. So that sounds really great that a machine can do that, right? But the thought process is, well, if you are analyzing someone's face, what if that person, for instance, is living with Down syndrome and doesn't have maybe a symmetrical face? How does that impact your algorithm and your predictions? Particularly if you aren't necessarily using your voice during the interview. What weight is that given? And so all of this is important because the answer to how to use AI and machine learning is to do so responsibly. And it's really important, and that's why Microsoft has created this framework to talk about responsible AI. And one of the important tenets is inclusiveness. And so in the data set that you're using to train the machine learning model, you want to make sure that you're including diverse perspectives, including people with disabilities. And so the reason why this is important is because, again, AI is being used to make some predictions, and we don't want to discriminate against people. You might have heard in the news other cases where companies are using AI to use filter through resumes for job candidacy. And in one instance, they were able to filter and discriminate against women just because of the language used. And so in that particular case, it's important to make sure that, the model that you're creating is fair, look for biases, and understand exactly how the predictions might impact people, because it might keep them out of important decisions. It might infringe on their human rights. And another pillar here is just transparency. Can you kind of trace back exactly how the machine got its answer? So all of that to say that you should think big in terms of this ASL and AI challenge. Definitely, we want you to think about how you can use technology to work better for you in the ways in which you communicate. And I was thinking of just, listing all of the different areas that we find ourselves in, whether that's retail or, at home. But the idea is for you all to think big. That's what innovation is about. Really using your lived experience to perhaps create something that could change the world. And so with that, I will turn it over for questions. Does anyone have the first question? If you do, feel free to put it in the chat window.
This is Raja speaking. So for your questions, if you wouldn't mind please typing your questions into the Q&A section, and then I can sign your questions for you. Okay, so we've received a question. It asks, what is the immediate future of AI other than self-driving cars?
That's a good question. I can talk a little bit about the program that I represent, AI for Accessibility, and the things that people are working on there. We have some really cool projects that are looking at using data in mental health to create AI solutions. So think of, being able to really get the right feedback at the right time to help people living with a mental health disability. Other things that our grantees in our program are working on include personalized object recognition. So I showed the Seeing AI app that is able to turn the visual world into an audible world. But there are some limitations with that. If I'm taking a picture of my phone as a person who is blind, perhaps I want the machine to let me know that that is my phone or that is my set of keys. And so being able to recognize personal objects in image recognition is something else that folks are working on. And we just published an article about that. So definitely recommend that you check out our website, aka.ms/AI for FOR accessibility, to find out other projects that folks are working on. The next question, do you think we will have AI-driven sign language avatars anytime soon? Ooh, I like that question. Oh, I'm so ready. I'm so ready for whatever your ideas are. That's the point of this challenge. But I will say that, as I mentioned with machine learning, it's about accuracy, right? So we could release something today and then you all could say, well, it's not really accurate in this situation, or it really didn't pick up my skin tone or my dialect. And that's why we need inclusive data. It's going to take lots and lots of data, and it's going to take the community, the deaf community, working together for us to get accurate sign language avatars or sign language recognition. But if that's one of your ideas, go for it. There are cash prizes, I heard, for this challenge, so go for it.
Okay, this is Raja. We have one more question in the Q&A section. Is there any known AI that has been applied to sign language recognition?
To sign language recognition, there are a lot of research, but nothing particularly that is out for public consumption. And you're going to hear more about that, the research that Microsoft has been doing and other researchers in some of the other talks. But I will say that it is a vast opportunity, but it's also complex. Like, you and I know how complex sign language is. And that's why we need the deaf community to actually be the ones to build that technology.
Okay, this is Raja. Another question asks, what are your thoughts about
You mean fake news?
We're just clarifying the question. So videos of sign, so excuse the interpreter, fake signers or not actual fluent signers who are creating videos on the internet, for example?
That's a good question. I had someone ask me that, that was a researcher a few weeks ago. about just being able to lift videos of signing off of YouTube or web search engines. And so that fluency part is really important. I think that in my personal opinion, there's room to use some of that signing at different levels of novice versus advanced signers. However, you need to have lots and lots of data. When that is the majority of your training corpus, you're going to have low confidence levels when it comes to real world situations. And so it's not that I think we can cut it off completely. I think that the point of AI and machine learning is to iterate. And there's so much to be learned from perhaps taking a subset of data, but making sure that it's inclusive and actually growing that data set so that it has real world application. But we can't just focus on novice signing or not take into account whether or not the signer is fluent when we build sign language data corpus.
Okay, this is Raja. I actually have a question. So how feasible would it be to use AI to teach new signers? So that could mean correcting errors in sign language, for example. Is that a possibility?
Oh, definitely. Anything's possible, Raja, you know that. But honestly, it is possible to focus on the use case of correcting perhaps newer signers, because there's a lot of material on that based on just the websites and the curriculum that they're learning from. So you'll definitely hear more about that from my other colleagues at Microsoft and ways in which we can aid in that. But again, that is a very separate use case when it comes to, we don't want to take something in the context of teaching sign language to someone that doesn't have a lot of experience and then applying that model for sign language translation for the deaf community at large. So if we're going to keep it tight in constrained context, yeah, we could definitely use AI to do that. As long as we have the data, we can definitely try to train a model on that data to recognize that, assuming we have diverse signers. We have to look at the quality of video presented, lighting, all of those things.
This is Raja. Just one more thing that I wanted to ask. So as you know, signing can be quite personal to a person's identity. So when it comes to technology and how those features are in some ways put onto those individual characteristics. So for example, you can imagine the differences between signing between a white man and a black man. How are those features demonstrated or differentiated using AI?
That's a good question. That's that intersection of just a lot of attributes when it comes to using humans and having human-centered design. So I'm a firm believer that if your data set is expansive and inclusive enough in the beginning, and that's what you use to train on, you can capture many of those use cases. But I do personally come from a community that uses Black ASL, so I'm very much acquainted with the difference. And it's interesting because, you know, in parallel, I just was reading an article about the limitations of voice recognition engines like Siri and Google Voice for people who are Black, and just in terms of being able to understand them. And so it's the same thing. It goes back to how inclusive was the data that was used to train that model. And so for sign language, when we want to pick up these intersectionality attributes, we want to start at the beginning by making sure that we have an inclusive data set that represents that. So data, 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 lots and lots of data is what we need for inclusive solutions.
Excellent. This is Raja. I have another question from the audience. It says, for us who work with technology, how can we learn more about models that are used within the AI context and how to select the right ones? That is, if we aren't necessarily heavily trained in statistics.
That's a good one. And so what I didn't show in today's presentation is that our cloud providers like Microsoft Azure platform has lots of options. So when it comes to the AI services that are pre-built, like vision services, computer vision, those sorts of things you can use. Then there's also the more custom solutions that you would need for machine learning algorithms. And we have some services that will try to fit your data to some pre-selected algorithms. And that is part of our AutoML service. So you can actually you can start with that as something to tinker with, and everyone is able to get a free Azure account for tinkering. There are also student versions of a free Azure account. And so I highly recommend with playing with some of the pre-selected algorithms that are available if you're just beginning, using just a small subset of data. We've done like experiments, just taking pictures from the internet and using that as data to see how well the algorithm could do some custom image captioning. So that type of concept of using pre-selected algorithms is available in Azure. And then of course you could always research, some of the other statistical algorithms that are out there as well.
Wonderful. This is Raja. We have another question here. This person says that digital assistants such as Alexa, Cortana, or Siri don't always give access to deaf individuals. Do you suspect that the tech industry will find a way to make sure that these services are accessible for deaf people to ask their questions?
Yeah, that's a really interesting project. And it is something that we've heard from the deaf community very recently, just in terms of all of these different voice assistants, and they don't seem to be going away at the moment. So how can they meet the needs of the deaf community? And we do have a project where we are looking at exactly how those assistants might be able to incorporate sign language data. Again, those voice assistants are great, but they are in confined context, in the sense of, let's start with what exactly would the deaf community want a voice assistant to do, perhaps in the confines of their home or in a meeting, for instance, and sort of work from there. So that is probably at the top of the list, what we've heard from the deaf community. And so there are people looking at it, but highly encourage you all, if you all have ideas of how a voice assistant could use sign language and what use cases that would solve, go for it in this challenge.
Okay, this is Raja. I have another final question. What is it like to work at Microsoft?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did move here from Chicago, right? So it must be pretty fabulous. What attracted me to Microsoft and what keeps me here is the journey that we're on of really listening to the community and really pushing the limits. The fact that we have an AI for Accessibility program, to me, just signals that we're really ready to push the limits of technology, to really think about the future, not just exactly what we have existing today in technology, but to think about the future of accessibility. And so it's been great to be around so many people that are passionate, not just on our accessibility team, but the company at large. Even at the CEO level, Satya is a huge supporter of accessibility. And so every year we have a company-wide hackathon, which I showed. The Seeing AI app came from that, and other things that are in the market have come from that. And during those hackathons, there are employees that don't work on accessibility as their day-to-day job that are so passionate about taking that week and developing an accessible solution that really impacts the disability community. And I love that spirit of hacking. I love that spirit of just continuing trying to figure it out and iterating with technology. And so I do enjoy that being at Microsoft.
Okay, well, this is Raja. So I'd like to take a moment just to wrap up this discussion. Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you to Microsoft Access and to Accessibility and to Microsoft Research for supporting this event. We will also have 3 upcoming events as well. All of the information regarding those events will be posted on our webpage, which we have shared in the chat box. I would like to ask, we will have Mary Bellard. We will have, and I'd like to thank all the people who've made this possible. Thank you to Heather, thank you to Mary, and for those who made this event possible today. We also will have a competition, which we hope will encourage more innovation and more ideas coming forward. So please do keep an eye out for that as well. And please do be sure to check our website. Again, the link is posted in the chat. Brianna, if you could take a moment just to come up on the screen. Okay, well, thank you once again to everybody. We will be closing the meeting in just a moment, but thank you to everyone who's joined us.